to happen. It's the first time in Durham Region, and I'm really thrilled to be here, so thanks, I appreciate it. So soon after the emergency was declared in the province of Ontario, the Social Services Emergency Operations Centre opened. One of the functions of the Emergency Operations Centre is the coordination of emergency social services. All orders of government started making announcements about funding that was being released primarily to the United Way of Canada, Community Foundations of Canada, the Red Cross, with the intention to support local service providers in responding to COVID-19. At the very same time, we noticed that many local municipalities were starting to release funds to support local efforts. So the Durham Region, so basically we called them all together, and the Durham Region COVID-19 Funders Table brought together all of those people, the United Way, the Community Foundations of Canada, Durham chapter, obviously, local municipal funders, in an effort to make best use of the funds available in Durham Region in a coordinated manner. Local data was made available and was gathered, and it was shared in an effort to ensure that allocations were informed and based on data to the best of our ability. And that is how the table started. But these are still early days. We've met, I think, 5 times. We've met once a month since we began, which was in April. And we've been meeting ever since then, and we've agreed to continue to meet indefinitely. The goals of the table are to gather local data to inform planning and allocations, to work towards alignment of funding and local priorities, to share funding data to gain an understanding of how funding is being allocated in terms of population served. For example, we can now take a look at the allocations and understand what percentage of funding is going to seniors, youth, or by geography. And by sharing the data, we can learn more about how many organizations are serving in one particular community. And this lends itself really well for the opportunity for the identification of potential partnerships. By working together, we have an opportunity to avoid duplication, to ensure the greatest value and the furthest reach of the funds made available in your region. That's about it, Darryl. Thank you.
That's great. It's really, I think it's really important and really great that you've all gotten together to coordinate these efforts for the community. It really does allow a much more comprehensive oversight and prevents duplication. And so I really applaud you guys for coming together and doing that. That being said, we do, I think it would be interesting if maybe we asked each of the representatives from each municipality here about what it is that they look for when they're funding grants. So I'm going to start with Kayla. I'm going to ask each of you the same question, and we'll start with Kayla. So, and the question is this: in the grants that you have funded over time, what commonalities do the successful submissions have in common? And what makes an organization really stand out to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. And definitely one of my favorites to answer because we get asked this quite a bit. So I think I have kind of a multifaceted answer. I would say first and foremost that the grant or the application, so when you're working with the town, it's actually for a fee-for-service application, so very similar, but just a wee bit different. But I would say first and foremost that they're detailed and really well thought out. I think the best applications really make no assumption about the reviewer. They speak in a language that's accessible and that doesn't really leave a reviewer with any questions about the context or how the project's going to be delivered. Second, I would say, and this probably goes across the board for any funder, is that they really align with the funder, or in our case, the town's priorities, our strategic plans, our areas of interest, to really make sure we're kind of on the same page. I would say that when we're looking at addressing a gap in service or a current need, I know that that's such a huge question that really and truly requires a lot of research, whether it's statistical, qualitative, or otherwise, but not only showing us that the need's there, but really showing us how they're addressing it, how they're going to evaluate it, how they're going to get through that piece. I think there's a couple of other pieces. I think it's, that return on investment, that's incredibly important for us. We want to see that the community is going to benefit in really tangible ways, that the agency will benefit, so growing its capacity, whether that's organizationally or setting them up for opportunities with additional funders or other funders. And again, of course, that the town will have a role or will have a legacy piece in the project. From our perspective, we want to see impact. That's literally why we called it Impact Ajax for our funding. And then just really some of the things that kind of make an application stand out when we're looking at it from our side is that probably knew the issue was there. It's been there for a little while. They've finally figured out a really good, innovative, evidence best practices way to solve it. And then the funding opened, and that was kind of their area to jump on it. Just other than that, it's just areas that are kind of that sweet spot in collaboration. So agencies that have partners on, not just to have partners as support letter writers, but ones that have real collaboration where we're seeing multiple sectors are engaged, they're active, and they're accountable in the project. For us, that really signals that there's a potential future where we might see that project kind of moving forward in ways that can be integrated in processes and programs. I think that's it. Sorry, that was a whole bunch.
No, that's fantastic. You mentioned priorities. Can you give us an idea of what the current priorities are in the town of Ajax?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a lot of different priorities. Sometimes they change with terms of council, and generally every council that comes in will create a community action plan or a strategic plan for their 4 years. So that will be available online. There are a lot of priorities within that people could tap into. But generally across the board, we really look at priorities that will impact kind of the social sector. So we're looking at areas connected to community safety and crime prevention, overall well-being and health, environmental sustainability, diversity and inclusion. Those are kind of our big areas. Right now, also a lot of municipalities are moving toward age-friendly strategies or implementation of those plans. So we're seeing a lot of those pieces popping up as priorities as well. But again, I would say kind of your best bet is to have a conversation with the funder or with us at the town and really let us walk you through where we're at on those strategic plans or where we're at on those kind of more local or multi-sectoral plans so that you have a space to fit in properly.
That's fantastic, Kayla. Thank you so much. Now, I do understand that you are on a second call, so if you have to go, please feel free to do that, and we'll move on to Erica.
Okay, thanks so much.
So Erica, same question for you. In the grants that you have funded over time, what commonalities do the successful submissions have in common, and what makes an organization really stand out to you?
All right, so, you know, Kayla kind of covered a lot of the points that we also look for here in Clarington. You know, we look for obviously programs or services that are going to have an impact on Clarington residents, and really defining that benefit and that reach in our community. We're also looking for applications that are addressing an identified need in the community. So identifying a gap in service or a new innovation that has yet to be tested. So we're looking for a project or a program that is needed in our community. We're also looking for applications that are diversified in their funding strategies. So they're not going to be reliant on our funding program, but they're looking at fundraising or other grant opportunities and that thus, you know, enabling them to be sustainable. As well, we do look for the applications to be aligned with the priorities of our funding program, which would encourage, you know, a connected community, again, environmental sustainability, an accessible and inclusive community, and innovations such as, you know, new project ideas or things that haven't been tested or pilot projects that they might like to test out.
Great, thank you. And I was curious, how does the town of Clarington identify those needs? Is it through informal conversations or interactions with the local charities, or do you have some kind of formal process where you collect data and are able to target specific needs within the community?
So it's probably a cross section of all of the above. Generally through our interactions with our community organizations and our members, you know, we have a fairly good handle on what's being offered in our community already, where there are some identified needs, and what those opportunities might be. We also do keep a database of programs, providers, and applications that have been funded in the past, so that we are aware of the offerings in Clarington and in the surrounding area.
Great, thank you very much. We're now going to go to Julie from the City of Oshawa. And Julie, same question for you. In the grants that Oshawa has funded over time, what commonalities do the successful submissions have in common, and what makes an organization really stand out to you?
Thanks, Darryl. And so this is, as Kayla said, it's an interesting question. In some regards, my answer is quite easy, actually, because we have, so our funding streams are, grant funding streams are all approved by council, and City Council has policies on each of those. And so from our finance department actually looks at all the grants and then provides reports to council for consideration of funding. So ours is a little bit of a black and white situation here in terms of making sure successful organizations who get those granting opportunities from the City of Oshawa meet the criteria within the policies. So, you know, if organizations are applying for whether it's a waiving of fees or a financial assistance or a partnership grant, making sure that the amount is in the cap that's laid out by the policy of council, that the organizations meet all of the criteria, the application meets the criteria that's laid out in those policies. So, and I think that's our feedback that we've received, or I've received from our finance department, is that, you know, a lot of the times the applications don't match the policies. So I think my guidance then would be is really, it's very clear that each one of those have policies and have outlined criteria, and in order to be successful, it would be really of the utmost to meet those criteria. And I'll put the link to each of those in the chat, Darryl, so everybody has those, and so you can see that.
That'd be great, thank you. Of all the criteria that you have for applicants, are there one or two that are like absolutely critical, or I mean they're all important, but what really should people really try to make sure that they do well of those criteria?
Really interesting question. I think that we match them all against the criteria. Again, so what we would do as city staff is provide a match against the criteria, and we would tell council whether or not they meet the criteria or they don't meet the criteria. So it is a bit of a black and white situation for us in Oshawa currently. I would say that one of the key things that we continually get that from applications that don't meet their criteria is whether, if it's an event that is not free of charge, that is automatically against the criteria. So really these things need to be free of charge for the public. If there's a fee attached to it, then it's something that doesn't meet their criteria. And I think the other piece is the cap, the funding cap. So there's a certain amount of funding cap for each of those streams, and that's the other piece. Hopefully that helps.
No, it does for me, because I know a lot of times if I've written a grant, you know, there's different funders have different ways of approaching it. Where you follow the criteria very strictly. Other organizations may have a really subjective review and approval process. So it's absolutely important to know specifically how the funder is going to evaluate any application. So I think before I move on to Sarah, I encourage everyone who's online to, if you have questions or have something to say in the chat, please use that feature. We've set aside a lot of time, at least half the presentation, to field your questions. So please feel free to do so. That's what our guests are on here in part to do. So Sarah, from the town of Whitby, I'm going to ask you the same question.
All right, well, thank you. So I'm Sarah, I'm with the town of Whitby, and we have a mayor's community development fund that's made up of a review committee from the community that looks at the applications. And I think a lot of the information that's already been shared highlights what we look for as well, but I'll just add a few things. I think the main feature that we're looking at is how does the project benefit the community? And sometimes it's a broader community in terms of Durham, but specifically because we are the town of Whitby, looking at how does it benefit Whitby residents and the Whitby community. I know one of the challenges I've seen just from some of the feedback over the last couple of days is that people are looking for operating funds. And one thing that we look at is how can the funding that we give be sustainable? So the challenge is when we give operating funds, what's going to happen the next year if we don't continue to fund that same program? Because generally funding the same program isn't something that we look at as a high priority. And I know it's challenging because we're looking at what are some new programs or innovative ways. And sometimes you're like, I just need to try to run what I'm already doing. So I think that's definitely a challenge because we are looking more at how can we fund a program, a new initiative, a pilot idea, a one-time project so that it doesn't require sustainable funding or have to be canceled if we can't fund it the next year. So that's an important feature that we look at. I think the other piece that I would say is we look at, is there a duplication of services? So are we aware of this already being offered somewhere else in the community and it's a duplication of services? And if so, has the applicant identified the ability to partner and how they are going to be able to strengthen this by partnering with others who provide those services? So I would say those are the main features. As well, we are looking at always promoting social inclusion and civic engagement. And the last thing that I would just mention that's more of an administrative feature, if you've already applied for funding, we have a final report that we request applicants do. It positions applicants much stronger if you have submitted that final report because it gives us a sense of the accountability and what you've been able to achieve. Whereas if that final report has not been submitted, it leaves open-ended questions as to where that funding went the last time. So I would just encourage, if you have already applied, make sure you get that final report in before you apply again if that project's done. So those would be some of my comments, but happy to answer questions when we get to that time in the webinar.
So Sarah, your follow-up question is going to be a bit of a toughie. It's not too bad, but you mentioned follow-up reports, and I know that in my experience with other places and over time, over the years, and even being inside of a charity, sometimes getting those reports in is challenging, and sometimes we don't. And I think you've been clear that that is really important. Do you find, are the majority of the organizations getting those reports in, or what is, if you had to pick a percentage, like how many are not meeting that requirement for you?
I'd say the larger the grant that's provided, the more likely the final report is to be done. And I would say applicants who apply more than once are also more likely to do those final reports. So in terms of those numbers, the larger grants and those that are reapplying, I'd say it's probably more like that 80%, whereas I'd say some applicants that are one time, it's probably more like 50%, and then sometimes we'll do a follow-up and say, hey, I think your project's done, could you give the final report? The other thing, we understand that we want to make the administration as simple as possible. So we really try to keep that final report simple. It's like 3 pages. We're not asking for attachments and all that sort of thing. So it's really just to say, were you able to complete your project? Did you use the money that was provided? So keeping it simple, I think, is something that we really need to be aware of to be able to help the applicants. Yeah,
and I think that's a really important part of stewarding our funders and in securing those future funds. You know, what did you do with the funds? Did it have the impact, and did it help our community, right? And you are more likely to get repeat funding, and I've noticed that with a lot of funders that I've worked with. So thank you. At that, we have, if there's any questions for our municipal partners, please put them in now. We're about to bring the United Way in to speak about the funding program they have available. So I know some of the municipal representatives may have to be elsewhere. So if you do have questions for them, now would be the best time. They may not be on the call going forward. So I'll just let that sit for a minute or so to see if any questions come in. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so I will introduce Barb. Barb is Barb Fannin from the United Way. Her screen says Cindy, I'll change that in a moment, but it's Barb Fannin from the United Way of Durham, and she's going to talk to us about the next round of funding that's underway through the federal government emergency community support.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about round 2 of the community support services funding. And this is the, we've had one go round. The federal government held back $350 million to come out around this time to pick up on the needs that did not get funded. So Durham region has 678,750. The funding is intended for the most vulnerable people, sectors with the most vulnerable people who have immediate needs that have not been met. Agencies who are serving those, agencies that are serving those folks are invited to go to our website, please. The application is there. I also have the application on that I can send out to you. I really encourage you to read through the criteria and read through what it is that they're looking for in terms of who you will be serving. It's really important, and I do want to stress this, if you have not applied, and agencies who have applied in the past for the first round are more than welcome to apply again. If you are a first time, please phone me first. Once you have your application, please phone me first. I'd like to walk you through it. I'd like you to know exactly what the reporting requirements are going to be and how to fill that application. And then this is a little bit on the selfish side, but how to fill it out that's going to make it easier for the reviewers that we have to go through it and take out the information that they need to know. There's also some information around the budget that you'll need to know before you fill out that budget. And that just makes it a lot easier. So we're not going back and forth constantly with my asking you for more and more, because that can get tiresome for the person on the other end who thinks that they've already had it done. And it cuts down on time for me as well. So we have some suggestions, and these two are on the website of what kinds of projects. And it's like, I'll name a few: preparing and delivering meals and or food hampers, supporting individuals accessing income supports and financial coaching, providing home care or personal support for seniors and persons with disability, people with mental health and wellness supports, including crisis interventions, and personal safety supports, access to safe transportation to get to appointments and run errands. And there's a lot. We've had a lot of applications that have come in to help agencies pivot to go from face-to-face to digital or virtual sessions. And that is still open in this round as well.
That's great, Barb. Can you tell us, this being the second round of funding, is it the same as the first round of funding?
In our first round of applications, we took rolling applications. So as some would come in, we'd bring our team together and we would do the review. And we did that right up until the end of, or the due date. In this round, we are not doing rolling applications. We have until the 30th of October for all applications to be in. We will work as diligently as we can to have an answer back to the agencies before the end date, which would be November 30th. We'd like to have the decisions made by mid-November.
That's fantastic. And are there certain types of causes or needs that are being prioritized through the United Way?
What we're doing is looking for a very broad section of applications so that no sector really goes without some kind of representation. And from right across Durham, that the funds will be working for all of Durham.
No, that's fantastic that it has such a broad applicability. Now, do you know, I know the government's been moving really quick on a lot of their programs. Is it the same thing for this type of program? Once people apply, how long might they expect before funds are dispersed?
The funds, the last time the funds were actually handed over to us, so as soon as the application was approved, we would have a start date for them, and we had been putting the funds out immediately. The first time around, we did it in 2 parts, the first half and then the second half. So all the funds were out the door by the end of August. Everybody had their full funding. This time around, we will probably give maybe 3/4 of the funds out and then the rest a little bit later because people are going to have to hit the ground running. These funds have to be used by the end of March, and I ask people to please keep that in mind when they're doing their budget, because those funds, if they're not used, they could have gone somewhere else, and we won't have that opportunity come March 31st.
So this program is really targeting people's short-term needs, just trying to get them through the next 6 months.
Yes, that's absolutely true. It is for the immediate needs.
I think what we'll do is we'll still field questions if in the next couple of minutes. While you're thinking about that, what I'll do is I'll move on to our next panelist, Vivian Curl from the Durham Community Foundation, who is also our hardworking, gracious host of so many things in the region. So thank you very much for all your efforts, Vivian. And today I want to ask you a little bit about what the DCF is able to do. Can you tell us a little bit about what are the current funding opportunities that are available through the DCF?
Yes, I can. We have 2 opportunities right now. The first one is also round 2 of the Emergency Community Support Fund. Like Barb, our deadline for the application is October 30th. The need is still to address vulnerable populations. We have $575,000 to grant out, but that is for the region of Durham and Northumberland County. So we're actually looking after 2 areas, not just the region of Durham in the second round. One of the questions I get asked a lot is if you receive funding in round 1, can you submit an application in round 2? The answer is yes, you can. The only challenge is that it cannot be related to funding that you received, project-related funding to round 1. So if you applied for food in round 1 for a specific thing, you can't apply for food in round 2 for the same thing. It just can't be done. So that's the difference on the Emergency Community Support Fund side. The second opportunity, the deadline is actually tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific time. It is the Investment Readiness Program. It is also a second round of funding that was made available through the federal government as well. This time around, priority applications are for Black and Indigenous-led organizations. That is a key priority. And eligible organizations can apply to receive anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 in non-repayable capital to develop their enterprise. And It's really about supporting an existing business or a business idea that fits the definition of a social enterprise. So that could be selling a good or service with profits going back into your mission to provide a positive social, cultural, and environmental outcome. And you've got to hit at least one, if not all three of those targets. So that's where we are in terms of the funding that's available right now.
We do have a question in the Q&A. Paula Carter would like to know if DCF will be capping the grants at $15,000 again.
No, actually, we are not capping this year, or this time around. So the maximum grant available per organization is $75,000. Having said that, I will say what I said in round one. There are 927 registered charities within the region of Durham. So when you are thinking about submitting an application, please ask for what you need and for exactly what you need. And I'm pretty firm on that. Can you tell I've had to say that quite a bit on phone conversations?
That's great. Thank you. And I have a question for you as well. So I had asked all the municipal guests what were things that were important to them. So I'll ask you the same question. With the granting you find, the applications that have been successful with you, what have you found the commonalities of those applications are, and what makes someone really stand out to you?
I think like everyone, we have priorities, and obviously for us, youth has been systematically the key priority within the grant stream. As you know, our endowments are sort of allocated, and the largest fund that we have is the youth fund up until about last year when we received a legacy gift. So next year, seniors will be the key priority for us. So not only will we be funding youth initiatives, but also senior initiatives. And I think from our perspective, it's about funding seed projects, even though I know as a registered charity ourselves, the key priority right now is for operating. But seed projects have always been one of the sweet spots for us. In fact, we normally only grant $5,000, and about the first year that I started, there was a pilot fund coming from the Refuge, which wanted to train youth at risk that were homeless in a catering business sort of style, where they would also generate some revenue, and they were asking for $10,000, and we gave it to them. And it is the one project that has really stuck with me because it was new and it was unique, and the youth training initiative went well beyond what the Refuge anticipated. They were able to generate revenue from the catering, and fundamentally the youth were able to go out and get jobs. And it was a huge win for the organization and for the youth and our community. And ultimately, that's the one project that really stood out and continues to stand out from my perspective. I'm not saying that there isn't one charity that does amazing work locally and everyone is deserving of funds, but from our perspective, the seed projects and are ones that we really do prioritize first when it comes to grant reviewing and decision making. And I think when I explain this one, I think you can understand why.
Yeah, Vivian, that's great, and it's an excellent success story. And I know that you're in a unique position where you're both funder and sometimes the fund recipient. So I'd like to ask you a question about stewardship. We'd heard about the importance of it earlier, and you've been on both sides of the ball. So. And again, you just told us a great story. So what would you tell people on how to be a good steward? How could they do a good job of telling their stories to you as a funder, and how important is stewardship to you?
It wasn't until I was in this role that I realized how important stewardship was, to be quite honest. And I think, and I'm on the fence, When I'm on the fence, that can be a challenge, but I'm on the fence for 2 reasons. Because as a charity, you're constantly looking for funding. And so you get the grant in, you get notification that the grant has arrived, and you just automatically move on to the next one. And you tend to forget about the circling back and the relevance of stewardship. And as a grant maker, I can tell you that stewardship is what will make or break you in terms of getting funding in the future. So letting us know that, you know, the impact of that grant, providing us with images that we can put in our community report to be able to tell that story, to be acknowledged for granting. Those are all really important things. And honestly, the final report piece that that was mentioned before, I find it really frustrating as a grant maker to have to chase charities down to submit final reports. And I think over time they've gotten better, but there's still quite a few charities on our list that have received funding that did not submit a final report. And I think that that's just a general reminder for everyone when you're out doing things. Yay for getting the grant. Double yay if you can do the follow-up too, because that's really critical.
And Vivian, I'll double down on that from my experience as well. So I've had limited experience on the funder side, although some, but mostly as a fundraiser, and I've been fundraising for a long time. And originally I thought that fundraising was about getting the gift. But over a long period of time, I realized that the first gift is not the gift. That's the test. The real gift is years down the road. It's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road is when the real gift comes. So oftentimes, particularly as you get grants or larger donors, their first gift is really just testing the relationship with you and to see if you're going to be a good partner and to see if you're worthy of their future much larger gift. So stewardship becomes extremely important in that regards. So I encourage everyone to think beyond the first gift to what the second and the third and the long-term engagement with funders is. So I think it's absolutely important.
Darryl, it's Julie. There is one. There's one question in the chat that I noticed from Deborah at the YWCA. I didn't weigh in on that chat because we at the City of Oshawa isn't doing any emergency funding, but it is a really interesting question and might warrant a bit of a discussion.
Thank you for catching that. It had not made it onto my screen with all these panelist viewpoints. So yes, so I'll read the question. Deborah from the YWCA Durham. Question for all the funders. Do you anticipate your funding priorities changing due to the impact of COVID? After the emergency funding cycle is over, will you be re-examining funding based on the new normal way that many of us will have to deliver services, i.e. more virtual than in person? So I think we have 2 questions. One, how has your funding priorities been changed due to COVID? And after COVID's done, what do you foresee your priorities? Will they go back to the previous, to the new normal, or some future new normal?
Our priorities have shifted a little bit in terms of responding to the emergency at hand. I'd also say the types of applications we're receiving have shifted as well, because we're not seeing those event style applications anymore, or even things like silent auction items or those things related to events. I think that we will all be facing a new normal when this is all over. I don't think we'll quite get back to where we were before. So what that is going to look like, I think it's a little bit hard to say right now, but I do think those priorities will shift. And I think the impacts of more remote working, remote events, work from home will continue, and that does impact what the needs are of some of the funders. So I think that there will be a shift. I think maybe not as far as the shift is right now, but somewhere in between is what my thoughts would be.
I could also echo Sarah's comments. I think here in Clarington, you know, we completed our emergency funding earlier this summer, And when we look forward to our funding programs in future years, you know, while in general, we'll be looking for innovation, which I think is probably a key word from this whole pandemic. Everyone's had to pivot and innovate to be able to continue operating and provide their services and reach their audience. So I think while our priorities as far as keeping our community engaged and making it inclusive and accessible and utilizing innovation, those priorities will stay the same, but I think the way that the applicants choose to meet those priorities is what's actually going to change for us.
For us, our priorities have not changed. We're still looking at the same priorities as we're going into doing our member agency reviews, although we're looking for a lot of feedback from them on what their needs are. They could very well change down the road. In fact, I'm sure they will. We will be doing a full review after we go through our funding for next year. The new normal, it's going to be interesting to see what that work looks like. But one of the silver linings I've seen with the funding that we've been putting out are agencies who have a hard time actually providing service for folks who live in the north. Transportation isn't always easy. The virtual stuff really has made a difference. We've got agencies now able to reach out to the north and serving clients that are up there. And during COVID, that was a real need that we saw. And we're pleased to see that so many agencies came in to do their programming virtually and expand their clients.
Fantastic, thank you. Does anyone else want to weigh in about how things may have changed due to COVID?
I actually have to admit that with the support of the Funders Network and the discussions that we've been having at the table, it's been really helpful for us as a community foundation. And when I say community foundation, it really is your community foundation for the region of Durham, not just my community foundation. It's been really helpful to understand what the needs are within each of the municipalities and to get a better understanding of the data and being able to respond to priorities as they're happening in real time because of the data. And so I think it's helped to make us more informed about our decisions. And I think that it's broadened our reach and scope and priorities and how we look at things. And so from our perspective, I think that that is something that will continue in future years. And when it comes to actually looking at granting priorities, even if we know that our largest fund is now seniors based, what is it the seniors actually need? And so those are the types of things that we're going to look at supporting. So yeah, definitely this entire thing seemed kind of insane at the very beginning, but I think that working collectively as a group and having really meaningful discussions has really broadened our understanding and of what the needs are, but also broadened my understanding of the challenges that charities are facing. And despite everything, I will still advocate on behalf of charities because as a charity, I completely understand where they're coming from. So a little bit of both things kind of happening at the same time. Does that make sense, Darryl?
Makes sense to me, as much as anything does.
I would like to just echo what Viv has said there. It has been really great to see the community come together and working together and in coordination, particularly where the funding is concerned, to see who should be taking on what specific activities and where they can be best suited. I think on the agency side, and I'd really like to give a shout out to the folks who work with the people who are experiencing homelessness or are precariously housed, and how quickly they move to help get people off the street and get them tested and get them safe. and with Mission United and Camp Samak and the floor that we had in the Motel 6 or it was Motel 8 for people who were symptomatic or had tested positive but were not symptomatic. They were at Camp Samak. And the silver lining in that is we've got people who have come in from being out sleeping rough and actually accessing services now, and some being housed. So, you know, there's good things that happen.
Barb, I couldn't agree more. It really is amazing how quickly that happened. And it gives me a lot of hope to, you know, when we all collaborate, we all coordinate, and we all put our collective resources behind something, we can move the needle on these things. So when I see something like this Funders Network and you guys all working together in a coordinated fashion, it really can be an amazing thing, and we really can make changes in our communities. So I thank each and all of you for what you're doing. On that note, I think that might be a good wrap up. We don't seem to have any more questions in the Q&A or the chat. So thank you all. And again, thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate your time here today. I know everyone has challenges, and thanks for being a part of this. We really do
You
appreciate
are
it.
most welcome, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Darryl, I'm going to center you out for a second. I really want to thank you for moderating and devoting 3 full days and an entire weekend and beyond to moderating this. It's been great having you engaged and involved, and I know you contributed countless hours of volunteer time, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you very much. And again, just nice to see the group here and the participants, and I hope everyone stays well and just take care of each other. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks,
Darryl.
everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank everybody.
Bye.
Bye.